Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Keystone Church study in the book of Revelation. We're continuing along. We're in chapter 20 of Revelation, but we're looking in other places in the Bible to explain some of the other things that are going on. The beauty of God's revelation, that it wasn't all just in Revelation. There's a lot of it in the Old Testament as well. So let's pray, and then we will jump in, picking up where we left off 2 weeks ago. God, we love you so much. We thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to be in your word, to open up the Bible, to learn, to look, to listen, to hear, and to understand. God, the beauty, the more we understand, the more we look, God, it's exciting. It's something to look forward to, and it's just proves how much you love us, that you even are giving us vivid details of what we will see and what will happen during the 1,000-year reign. We're so grateful. It won't come as a surprise to us. We'll know, we'll understand, and we'll be able to appreciate it even greater then. But Lord, thank you so much for your love and your care, that you've given us the word. You've given us the gospel of Jesus Christ. Be with us now as we continue the study. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so we are going to jump into the temple, the physical temple, and the time of the kingdom. And I think for a lot of people going through this study, it's changed maybe your perceptive of where people go that died in the Old Testament, where they go when they die now, up until the rapture. Things are slightly different than what we imagined. Not everybody is, I don't think anybody thought this anymore, flying around with a harp and wings and looking like an angel. There's very specific things, and even during the rapture, we finished the tribulation. The rapture's already happened. We've come back to earth now with Jesus. We're in the 1,000-year reign that we're looking at things. And I think we're even finding out that this isn't even the new heaven and the new earth yet. The earth was reshaped and reformed at the end of tribulation. But as we've learned over the last couple sessions, there's still sin. There's still a tiny, tiny element of sin. So there's still some very unique things that we may have thought that weren't going to be around are still going to be somewhat prevalent. But for us, if say Jesus came back tomorrow and we raptured, we won't be subject to that sin. We will be in our glorified bodies. So let's pick up where we left off and find out about the temple and the specifics. And like the beauty of God, like I mentioned, we can't find those in Revelation chapter 20, 21, or 22. We have to look elsewhere because God uses the entire Bible to explain the end times, as we've seen Jesus coming the first time incarnate, and the kingdom and that 1,000-year reign. It's all woven together entirely throughout our entire Bible. So as we've looked at the sections or the outlines of our Revelation, if you go back to when we started a year and a half ago or so, when we looked at the outline, we saw that the tribulation and Jesus' return. So Reese, put up the first image for me. All right, so the tribulation has already happened. Jesus has returned. There was that 75-day interval. We already covered all the details on that. Now we're in this 1,000-year kingdom. We're in the 1,000-year reign, the millennial reign that's happening. And we just have to look outside of Revelation to see what's there. And then there's some things that will happen during that 1,000 year that we're just not told. There's just not details yet that we've been revealed, or maybe not. We'll just understand when we get there. But John tells us in Revelation that at the end of this 1,000-year kingdom, which we'll get into in chapters 21 and 22, at the end of this 1,000-year reign, Reese, go to the next slide. All right, our planet that we're on now, after the end of the 1,000-year reign, all gets destroyed. Now, you would think during the tribulation, with everything we've heard, that would have been a good time to just start all over. But no. But because at the end of that 1,000-year reign, and like I said, we'll get into that, that's when Satan is dealt with once and for all. He's gone. Sin completely goes away. In the next slide, then we have the new heaven and the new earth, which we will continue out of that 1,000-year kingdom into that period with Jesus as well. So that's what we've got to look forward to. That's what's coming up. So even during this 1,000-year reign, the earth is reshaped, reformed, if you will, and we've already looked at some of the details on that. And to just a quick recap, we're not going into any of the details, but as we've looked at what happens in this 1,000-year reign, the kingdom reign, we looked at the order of creation. We looked at the daily life and death, what it would be like for us over the last few weeks. And tonight we're going to get into the temple, what worship will look like, and kingdom law. We might not finish it all, but we'll get pretty close. And then the last thing that we're looking at in this 1,000-year reign is the final war against Satan, which happens right at the end of the 1,000-year kingdom. And just kind of like with Armageddon, it's not really a war. It's more or less God dealing with him once and for all. So tonight, we're going to focus on the millennial temple. So we have to turn to the book of Ezekiel. We're going to be there a lot tonight. So if you want to turn to Ezekiel, he's pretty much the only prophet who tells us anything about these things and specifics about the temple that will be here on earth. Now, if you remember, we talked about what Jerusalem will look like in the new kingdom. Remember, it's going to be the highest mountain peak. There'll be a very large plateau at the top. It will be the most elevated mountain in the world at that time. Jerusalem will be there. The temple will be there. And some other things that we'll talk about tonight that we've mentioned briefly already. But as we look at this in Ezekiel, to look at it, we're going to actually look at specifics, and then with some images, and hopefully you'll be able to imagine, we're going to take a tour of what the temple is going to look like, because we will have the opportunity to go there, and we will be actually required to go there several times throughout the year during this 1,000-year reign. How we get there again, we don't know. Don't know if it's by boat, car, plane. We just appear there. We don't know. But we do know that the only temple we hear about in the book of Revelation, as we've read through all the chapters so far, is in chapter 11, when we hear about the temple that the Antichrist rebuilds or allows the Israelis, the Jewish people, to rebuild to start the sacrifices again. And in that temple, that's where the Antichrist will sit after 3.5 years. We went through this already. That's the abomination that's talked about several times throughout the Bible, when he declares himself God and abolishes all of the religions. So we've talked about that. That's the only temple that's talked about throughout the book of Revelation. And Daniel chapter 12 told us that the temple would need 30 days. Again, Daniel in chapter 12 is talking about at the end of tribulation, and he said there's going to be 30 days for it to be cleansed because of the abomination that occurred there by Christ. Now, obviously, God could clean it out once and for all, but that's part of that 75-day interval to just get that all cleaned up. So if Daniel is talking about that there's a temple and need to be cleaned out, that means there's more than just a ornamental fixture. It's going to be a place of purpose, a place of work, a place of worship. It's going to be integral and an important part of the kingdom. But the temple that we'll have during that millennium reign won't be the exact same temple. It will be grander than any temple we've seen before. It won't be the exact same one that the Antichrist sat in, but still there will be a complete restoration or rebuild, if you will. The point is that it will be used, the temple will be used, and it will fulfill a purpose in that 1,000-year reign. So let's turn to Ezekiel chapter 40 first. Ezekiel chapter 40 in your major prophet section of the Old Testament. And we're going to read verses 2 through 4 to begin with. And we've got a lot of images that are going to be on the screen today. So if you are watching online and you need to go back later to see the images, you can put little notes in your, if you're following along, so that you can go back and maybe enhance it. I wish there was a way for us to make them larger, but this is what we got with an iPhone and a setup we have here in the house. So chapter 40 of Ezekiel, verse 2 through 4. And remember, Ezekiel, like a lot of the prophets, he's being shown visions, he's being told things, he's being shown things that will happen to the people immediately, as well as things very similar to Isaiah here, after the end of the age of the Gentiles and after the tribulation. So in the visions of God, he brought me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain, and on it to the south there was a structure like a city. So he brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze, with a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand. And he was standing in the gateway. The man said to me, Son of man, see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and give attention to all that I'm going to show you. For you have been brought here in order to show it to you. Declare to the house of Israel all that you see. So there's 9 chapters within Ezekiel that kind of take us on a tour through the temple. We're not going to read every single verse. We're going to go through a lot of them. And this is where it begins. The discussion of the millennial temple. It actually began in Ezekiel. We discussed that Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, all that, the topography of modern day Jerusalem is all changed. Reese, the next image, image 4. So this is what it'll look like now. The mountain will be raised up. There's a little bit, to the south of it there you see it looks like a city, but that's the temple. There would be other things there. This is just an illustration. But way up high, and then on this plateau will be the temple. And it's the highest mountain. The structure's so massive, he calls it looks like a city. And, as we saw earlier in our study, the land around Jerusalem, if you looked at pictures today, it's very hilly, and there's some valleys and so forth, but it's not even the highest peak in all of the Middle East, let alone the world. But here in the kingdom, the millennial age, it is the chief mountain, and so everything has changed. So, as Zeke said, it looks like a city on top, and he's told to measure it. So why? Why is it so important that we hear all these measurements? By the measurements, we're going to see, and we should be able to gain a massive appreciation of the ginormous scale of how grand this temple is going to be in the temple of this millennial age. So the next image, Reese. All right, so that's kind of an illustration. We're going to show you what it looks like in the beginning, then we're going to go through step by step of how Ezekiel got to see all of this. And then we'll explain all this. We might have to come back to this one later, Reese. But the temple itself is right here. This is the wall that goes around it, the gates and so forth. So we'll come back to that. But that's what he saw when he's looking from, down the south from where he was at and sees this ginormous, looks like a city temple. So why do we need to know the dimensions? Have you ever read through some of it, even in the Old Testament, when they're giving us all the measurements of the ark and of the temple, and you're like, okay, and then you hear him give it to Moses, and then you hear Moses giving it to the people, and it's like, we've just read this like 85 times. Well, why do we need to know the dimensions? It's so that we can be confident that we're looking at something that we've never seen before. This will be something that has never been built, that has never been experienced by the Jewish people of any time throughout. So we'll start by gaining an appreciation of the scale and compare it so we can really, really grasp it. So the original tabernacle in Moses' day was a tent structure. Reese? All right. So remember, Moses took the Israelites out of Egypt. They were in the wilderness. They got the 10 Commandments, and then God started giving him many, many other things that they were supposed to do. They were supposed to build the temple. So this fenced-off area, and then you've got the altar, the little pool, basin, if you will. And then in here, the back third is where the Holy of Holies was. And then inside this veil, or this tent curtain, is the holy place, which was split. And was split. And in the back was the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant went. And there were certain items in each one. And this was all carried by the Levites during those 40 years. And it was all mobile. So they would tear this down, pack it up, carry it with the poles, and carry it so on. So this is what the temple looked like. And if you see that little yellow square down at the bottom, it says Moses Tabernacle, we're going to use that as reference as we build out some of the other tabernacles. So after a few decades, God allowed Solomon to build a proper temple, a more permanent structure. God designed the temple, of course. It was more solid, more ornate. So here's a comparison of, and the next image. So here's a drawing, rendering from biblical descriptions of what Solomon's temple looked like. And then you could see you could fit Moses' tabernacle with the whole fence in area inside of Solomon's temple. All right? So, and let's see. In honor, since we just finished Super Bowl week, let's throw a football field up there, Reese, to give us reference of how big it actually is. So you can see even Solomon's temple would fit into almost the whole width of a football field, but it's not even as long as the 100 yards of a football field. But you can see it's much bigger than Moses, almost double or triple that size almost. and then that's what a football field would look like. So that's what we're talking about. Now, Herod then constructed a temple, and as we talked about before, whether here or on a Sunday, he built his, and his was a little bit taller, a little bit bigger, a little bit grander scale than the one that Solomon had built. And if we look at our next one, it really dwarfs Solomon's temple. This is it, the structure right here, not all the houses and things there, but everything inside that walled area. There's the temple, there's the gate coming in, and you can see Herod's temple in the green. Almost 3 football fields could fit in there. So it's, now granted, stadiums, it would be big, like a little bit bigger than a modern football stadium, because they obviously have their stands and suites and everything around it. So it was a very, very large structure. So the millennial temple will be about this big. It's going to be huge compared to even Herod's temple. You could fit Herod's temple in there another 2, 3, or 4 times. So as we look at this, this is the west side back here. This is the north gate. This tall thing. When we talk about gates going into the temple, they're not swinging gates. It's an opening. Like you see the opening going there. This is the east gate. This is the south gate. There is no west gate. This will be almost identical to the way it was set up during during Solomon's time, Herod's time. There's the 3 gates. This is the east gate. You'll read about that throughout the New Testament. There's the north gate, the south gate. Okay? But it's big. So once you get inside the walls, this is the outer courtyard. All of this that comes around. And then here's 3 more gates that enter into the inner courtyard. And then we'll get into more detail on that, and then going up into the temple. Okay? All right. So, in this temple, it's an operating temple. There's going to be priests and guards, and the number of people who can flood into those areas at different times. Just knowing that there's going to be a temple like this reminds us and that there's guards and that there's gates and things to get in, that sin is still prevalent. And we talked about that. If you need to see that again, you go back. Sin is still prevalent. Those people that survived the end of the tribulation, they'll be coming in their fleshly body. They'll have a chance to have their faith, and how that all plays out, we're not 100% sure, but there will still be a small remnant of sin that's available. So it's kind of a reminder. Now, it won't be in us. Anybody who raptures, anybody who's already died and has their glorified bodies, we really won't have the ability to sin. That it won't affect us. We are holy. We have those new bodies. We're good. But those other people, it will still be a reminder of us that we're still supposed to do the things we're supposed to do and move on and so forth. But this is a place to deal with sin, and it's a place for Jesus to rule. The temple is a perfect square. Let's see the next imageries. All right, so you probably can't read the dimensions on there, but it's got the dimensions going around that square where it has A and B. B is being the north side. A is the east gate right here. And then you've got the south gate and then the west gate, which there isn't, the west side of the temple area, but there is no gate there. Then it's got different, sizes on there, the actual number of feet that it's going to be. And if we look at the next imageries, all right, so this is the man like bronze that Ezekiel saw, and there's a measuring rod that's about 10 feet tall. So this little wall that he's standing next to is about 10 feet. That's the measuring rod that he's told to take and measure things with and go around with this figure. So, and this is right back here is the east gate that will be going in to the temple area. So, entering the gate, again, it's not a swinging gate, but it's more like a chamber with other rooms inside. So let's go to the next imageries. All right, so this is what, over here where the far side, I wish I had a little laser pointer. That would be where you would come in. That's the entrance to the east gate. As you come in, you walk through this long chamber, and there's different numbers of rooms, 6 feet across on each side. So as you walk in, and we'll see the next imageries, and they're 25 by 50. So this is if you're looking in, you can see a little bit of the chambers there, and then there's a guy that's a guard. There's 2 guards at each post on either side as you walk in. So that's the entrance, the east gate going in towards the temple. And this is where Ezekiel is being brought through in this vision. The next one is a view from above with a little bit more of the illustration, almost as this somebody with, what's the game you used to play, Reese, or play with on when you build everything? Minecraft. Yeah, it's like somebody with an adult Minecraft built this. So these are the different chambers that you can see down that are 6 feet across, that the dimensions were on there before. So you'd walk in over there to the right, come in through the gate, and then you would come out here, and that's where the 2 posts would be at the guard. So as we walk through from the right all the way to the left and then enter the courtyard and go to the, no, I don't have a next image for that. But each of these measurements, as you looked and why it's so important, numbers have meaning. Now, some people go crazy and look at the numbers of where verses are. Remember, God didn't write the Bible in the Greek and like putting chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 6. So those numbers, yes, they can be important, but it's more the numbers that are in things that God uses that are important. So each of these numbers have a significance and a meaning. The measurements all have a meaning. The 6-foot guard room, the gate, which is 100 feet long, 50 feet wide, 100-foot door, 120-foot porch that hangs out over it. So dimensions for the gate, all the dimensions for the gate come in increments of 5 or 6. And 5 is the number of grace. When we read throughout the Bible and hear the number 5, 5 is the number of grace. And 6 is the number of, does anybody remember? Sinful man. 6 is the number of man. So it's pretty significant that, and shows us that there will still be some sin that Jesus is going to have an impact on and allow people to have faith in him. That if the sinful man, 6 being the dimensions, passes through everything that's divisible by 5 or increments of 5 into grace. Nothing's changed since the first temple. Nothing's changed since Jesus was here. It's still that entering of sinful man. We don't get there by our merits. We don't earn it. It's all through grace. So God's even into the little details. So basically the temple is a place where sin meets grace. Kind of like when we're able to meet with Jesus, it's where our sin meets grace. Same thing. So next image, Reese. All right. So see the 2 palm trees? There will be palm trees like that on the inside of the courtyard going into the inner courtyard, and also at the, if this is the east gate, at the north and the south gate. Now, why are these ornate palm trees built there like this? Well, imagine there's hundreds of thousands of people out here in the courtyard for a day of worship, and so they can see where they need to exit. Because all these walled structures are very similar, stretching for a long period of time, so it helps them know this is where we need to go. That's an entrance or that's an exit. So this is the outer courtyard. So once you come in between these palm trees, this is what we were just looking at, the upper view from. This is the east gate entrance. So once you come in, you are now in this outer courtyard. And then this is the porch that extends from the outside, that comes over the entire wall going into the temple area. Okay? So if we look at a bird's eye view of this in our next image of the entire temple, so here's the east gate with the 2 palm trees. So we would, Jesus enters, we'll get into that later, but you can enter from here, you can enter from here at the south gate or the north gate. Remember, there's nothing on the west side. So here's the wall that goes all the way around. Here's your 3 places that you can come in. And then again, there's the inner courtyard where the altar is. And again, you have another inner south gate, an inner east gate, and an inner north gate. So now when you get there and the tour guide goes to tell us, hey, you know what? I've seen this before. I'm all set. I know where I'm going. I see the palm trees. Exit south. So then once we're inside, the next image in the temple area or the inner court, going into that area, this one's a little bit fuzzier. I apologize. Go back one, Reese. They didn't give me a good image. What we're looking at now is inside 4, 6, and 5. You see the altar there and then the steps going up into the actual place where the holy place is and the Holy of Holies. So now our next image, as we go in here, you see pretty much as you go in there, the altar is pretty prominent. Go to the next image. This is what the altar would look like. There's steps going up to it. This is how God described that they would build that. And then the steps behind that go actually into the actual structure or the actual building. Okay? So, pretty much the only thing in that inner courtyard is that altar and the steps going into the temple itself, which is actually in there. So then you're still continuing. Remember the east gate, this is all facing, you're going directly west up into the temple. That's the direction you would be traveling, and then into the temple itself. Now the old temple, like we talked about before, on these doors going up those second set of stairs, which we'll see an image of in a second, there was veils, or there was actual physical doors there. And in the day of Moses, or even the day of Solomon and Herod's temple, only certain people were allowed in that part. Only certain Levites, certain priests, certain people from the generation of the Levites were allowed in there. Not anybody could go in there. And then even into the Holy of Holies, it was only like once a year that they were allowed in there. So there was veils or doors on those. This one, there's no doors, there's no veils. You can see straight in all the way through, even to the Holy of Holies. So that's what this is going to look like. And as we continue the next imageries, all right. So as you come up into the temple, it's surrounded then. Behind it, there's this west building, which we don't get any description about whatsoever. I wouldn't say it's a mysterious west building, but there's this giant structure back here that's used for something. On either side of the temple, there's priests' quarters, priest chambers, which we'll get into more detail. But then as you come in and go into the temple, there's something different about this temple than the other one. Like I said, the other one had veils or had doors on it. There's only one table of incense back closer to the Holy of Holies. And then the next smaller room has no furniture in it at all. Let's see, go to the next imageries. See if we have it. Okay, go back one. Yeah, I don't think I put images up for this. But once you go in, it's split into thirds. The first part, 2/3, there's the one little table that has incense on it. And then back in the place that would have been the Holy of Holies, there's nothing in there whatsoever. There's no furniture whatsoever. Now, why is that? All the furniture before and the articles that were in the temple, they would call them the articles of the temple, were to represent Jesus. They were to represent something significant that was going to happen, where Jesus would be able to come and forgive our sins once and for all. Well, now that he's already lived and died, and now that he's come back, it doesn't need all those other things. All it's going to need is the presence of Jesus. So, he'll be there. That's where he will reign, back in that Holy of Holies. That's where his presence will be for the 1,000 years. That's where he's going to be. And he's there to intervene to the Father who's still in heaven. Other buildings, like I said, for the priests, that's kind of like their locker room. They'll come in, they'll get dressed, because it says throughout Ezekiel, you can look at in those chapters, they take off their priestly garments and then they exit and leave and go home. When they come back in, they put on their priestly garments and they go to work. You know, whether you work a job where you would go to a locker room or play sports, you go into the locker room, you put on the uniform you need, you go out, you do your thing, you come back, you take it off. Very similar. Now this is 3 stories, the 3-tiered priest chambers. It's 3 stories high. And there's, steps and little viewing areas, whether they're viewing different things going on out during worship times or not. We're not sure exactly, but that's most likely what they're there for. The next imageries, and we studied this before, it says there's a river that comes out from under the temple. The temple being not just this whole big structure, but from underneath the actual structure where Jesus will be a river that comes out, it comes down this little channel. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little light blue channel that comes through the inner courtyard, then will cut through the outer courtyard, and then will exit out right by or under the east gate area. That's where that river will come out. We talked about that before, and then in our next image, that river then splits, and part of it will go to the east, which in my mind is the other direction, but anyway, it'll go to the east towards the Dead Sea, and then the rest goes out to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what happens with that river that we talked about before. So it's outside of the gate that it splits and it goes in that direction. Now this river gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And as you read through, you'll see Ezekiel's wading through it till it gets up to his up to his neck, and it starts getting deeper and deeper and wider, that he exits so that he's not swept away by it. So it's going to might start off as a little channel, but becomes a very, very large river. All right, so the temple itself and Christ's placed in the temple. So in prior temples, where was Christ? Anytime there's a physical manifestation, when we've been going through this in our study, covered and read on Sunday mornings at Keystone Church, but anytime there's a physical manifestation of God in the Old Testament into his creation in any form, it's always the second person of the Trinity or the Godhead. That means it's never literally the Father, it's Jesus Christ or Christ that shows up, the second person of the Godhead. And Paul tells us in Colossians 1 that he, Jesus, the second Godhead, is the visible form of the invisible God. So, like I said, any manifestation of God that we see throughout the Bible where he's in his creation down here on earth is always the second person. It's not the Father. In the Old Testament, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago on a Sunday, the angel of the Lord, the Shekinah glory, that's all pre-incarnate Christ. That's Jesus in the Old Testament. Once we see him show up in the New Testament, we know through our Christmas story, Jesus in the flesh, he came, he lived as a child, became, an adult, was the Messiah. We all know his story. He lived, he died, he was crucified, he rose again, and now he's in heaven waiting for us with the Father to tell him, hey, it's rapture time, and we get to go be with him. But in the OG tabernacle, if you will, back in Moses' day, and even the temple with Solomon, the glory of God would appear in the Holy of Holies above the ark. So pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. This is what it would have looked like in an illustration. Next one, Reese. Okay, so this is you can see like the tent type thing. Jesus would show up, the Shekinah glory, above the Ark of the Covenant. And he would his presence would rest between the wings, if you read and know the description of what the Ark of the Covenant actually looked like. Or watched Indiana Jones. It's a pretty close depiction of what the Ark of the Covenant would look like. So this would happen where Jesus would show up and be there in this place at different times. And then even in Solomon's temple, next image, there's times where I mentioned where his presence showed up in the Holy of Holies. Again, only one priest could go back there a certain time of the year. The Shekinah glory would sit over the mercy seat. Again, that place of the Ark of the Covenant was called the mercy seat, and that's where his presence would rest, in that same area. This would happen until he departed his temple, and this was also in Ezekiel's days that Ezekiel wrote about this, but it's also when the presence of God left, and the people had sinned, and God had told them, you hear this in Isaiah as well, but they had sinned. Israel, the northern country, was gone. The split country of Israel, Judah below, had been told, hey, you need to repent. They still weren't repenting. Even the priests were involved in the sin. And God said, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, is going to come and take you away. The city is going to be destroyed. The temple is going to be destroyed. So, of course, if God knows his temple is going to be destroyed and the glory of God, Jesus, sits there, he's not going to sit there and wait for the temple to be destroyed. He's going to leave. So he would actually leave the temple, and Ezekiel writes about this. So before this, the destruction of the temple, God departs. The glory also left. Ezekiel writes about it in detail in a very particular way. And he says, and we'll go through these scriptures in Ezekiel chapter 10, and then I'll give you the verses. He would leave, first exiting this Holy of Holies, and then he would go through the temple that we just looked at, like those drawings. He would go through the temple, and then he rests on the threshold of the doorway, or the doorway of the temple. So he pauses there. And Ezekiel 10, verse 4, it says, then the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub to the threshold of the temple, and the temple was filled with the cloud, and the court was filled with the brightness of the glory of the Lord. Then it says that he continues, after he paused there, he goes to the east gate of the temple structure. Remember, we just took a tour in through the east gate. So in Ezekiel chapter 10, verses 18 and 19, then the glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the temple. So now he's leaving the temple, and stood over the cherubim. These are the cherubim that are there to escort him out. When the cherubim departed, they lifted their wings and rose up from the earth in my sight with the wheels beside them, and they stood still at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of God of Israel hovered over them. So then finally, the glory of the Lord is there. He's going out through that east gate, not the exact same east gate, but representative, very similar. It pauses there. Then finally, the glory of the Lord moves outside across the valley and to the top of the Mount of Olives. He's still moving east. So our next image. So this is the old city. You see the gold mount. This is modern day Israel. That's where the temple would have been. And then he goes down east, goes up to the top of the Mount of Olives. And then he pauses one more time at the peak of the Mount of Olives. Again, not a giant mount, but he's up there at the top in Ezekiel 11, verses 23 and 24. Ezekiel 11, 23 and 24. The glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood over the mountain, which is east of the city. That's right there, the Mount of Olives. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me in a vision by the Spirit of God to the exiles in Chaldea. So the vision that I had seen left me. So the presence of God disappears right there in Ezekiel's day, and it never appears again. Never once and inhabited the temple again on earth. After Herod rebuilt, or the temple was rebuilt, and then Herod adds on to it and makes it grander, God's presence, Jesus, never shows up in the temple again. That was the last time. Now, some of you may think, wait, didn't Jesus walk into the temple? Yes, Jesus walked in to that outer courtyard, but Jesus never went into the Holy of Holies when he was here incarnate. He didn't reside there. He didn't live there like he did before. So that was the last time that his presence was there. So Jesus entered, it's significant, when Jesus entered Jerusalem before his crucifixion, he entered through the, guess which gate? The east gate. He exited through the east gate before that, when he went over to the Mount of Olives and his presence was last there. And we talked about this briefly already. He will enter Jerusalem the same way he left, coming back in through the east gate. We talked about that. We won't go into detail, but remember, when the people in Jerusalem call out, they're under siege from the Antichrist. He comes down. He goes to the Bozrah area first, and we're with him. He marches up from the east. He's headed west, but he comes from the east. He gets to the Mount of Olives. He splits the Mount of Olives open. The people that have believed in him are able to exit from the Antichrist. They go through the split part of the Mount of Olives, and then he will enter through the east gate when he enters into the new temple. And so forth. So that's his second coming. Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 1 through 5. Ezekiel 43, verses 1 through 5. Then he, this is the one who's leading Ezekiel around, led me to the gate facing toward the east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the way of the east. And his voice was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. And it was like the appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when he came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Chebar. And I fell on my face. And the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate facing toward the east. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court. And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. Then I heard one speaking to me from the house, while a man was standing beside me. He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the sons of Israel forever, and the house of Israel will not again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their harlotry and by the corpses of their kings when they die, by setting the threshold by my threshold and the doorpost beside my doorpost, with only the wall between me and them. And they have defiled my holy name by their abominations which they have committed. So I have consumed them in my anger. Now let them put away their harlotry and their corpses of their kings far from me, and I will dwell among them forever. So this is how he comes back in again. He comes in from the east. The passage is, we read that at the beginning. This all happens at the beginning of the kingdom, that 1,000-year reign. The glory of the Lord will fill the temple. And Jesus, we talked about this a little before, he will remain there for 1,000 years. Some people may have thought during this 1,000-year reign that they could go on hikes with Jesus, or go and break bread with them, or ask him to rebaptize them in the Sea of Galilee or the Jordan River. No, Jesus will be in the temple 24 hours a day, 1,000 years. That's where his presence will be. But we will be able to go there and see this. Now, this is the cool part. The glory of the Lord will fill the temple and remain there for 1,000 years. So if you're in the temple, come from the east, you could see the glory of God residing in the temple. But once he comes in, go back to the original temple picture I had, Reese. The very, very first, yeah. So he'll come in through this east gate. Once he goes in, he'll then go through the inner east gate. He'll come in, and he'll be sitting in this back third in the Holy of Holy areas. So if you're anywhere in this temple area and look straight up through there, you will be able to see his glory shining in the temple. Or if you're inside there, or whatever the case may be. But this east gate right over here, after he enters it, it gets closed. Nobody else will enter that east gate. It will still be there, but it will be closed. No one else will be able to come in. No one else will be able to come out. It'll be shut forever, and it won't be open up again after Jesus comes through there. Very symbolic of his power, his entry. Ezekiel 44, 1 through 3. Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 1 through 3. Then he brought me back by the way of the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces the east, and it was shut. So that's that east gate we're talking about. That's where it'll be shut. The Lord said to me, this gate shall be shut. It shall not be opened, and no one shall enter by it. For the Lord God of Israel has entered by it. Therefore it shall be shut. Now as for the prince, he shall sit in it as a prince to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by way of the porch of the gate, and shall go out by the same way. So it's closed, symbolic of his entrance for us, his bloodshed, his grace. He's the only one, the only way, his unique work of atonement. So you can only enter by his blood through that gate. So he's the only one that can enter through there. Now, the cool thing is that we just read in verse 3 there in Ezekiel 44. Do you remember who the prince is going to be of Egypt? I'm sorry, that's a movie. The Prince of Israel. If Jesus is the King of Kings, the 12 apostles are going to be ruling over the ginormous land of Israel. Remember who the prince is?
Was it David?
Exactly. King David's kind of demoted. He's now Prince David, but David will have access to the East Gate area. After it's closed, that's kind of like his office. It says he comes in through a certain way, he enters there, he's able to eat bread and see the glory of the Lord, and then when he's done, he's able to go home. That's what it reads there in 3. As for the prince, that's David, he shall sit in it as a prince. Again, that's talking about the East Gate area, to eat bread before the Lord. So he's in the presence of God. He'll be able to look directly out, directly all the way in, and then he leaves by the same way. So I think that's pretty cool. Next imageries. Oh, sorry, go all the way, number 26. All right, so there's like David with his little lunchbox going in. And I don't think he actually enters that way. There's other ways to go in, but that's where he'll be. He'll be able, so if he's actually sitting there and looking directly to his east, he'll be seeing the glory of God shining in the other room. So it's kind of cool. Now, the only time we actually physically see Jesus, and we will be able to see him. Now, remember, he's not going to look exactly like we imagine that he looked when he was here on earth. It'll be more of a glorious representation, reality of who he is. But we will see Jesus when we go there to worship. And we will be going to this temple. We will go there on for three different types of reasons. On feast days, on Sabbath days, and new moon celebrations. So look at what feast, because if you know anything about the Mosaic Law in the time, there was a lot of different feasts they had, a lot of different times of celebration. There's only going to be 2 feasts in the kingdom. Now, let's look at a calendar. The next image, Reese. Okay. So on the inside is our calendar, the blue. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, to December. The Jewish calendar is on the outside, and theirs is slightly different than ours. Theirs is set up on a lunar calendar. Ours is set up on a solar calendar. What that really means, just a little fact for you, in case you're ever on Jeopardy. But the 7 festivals that they're told to celebrate, next one, Reese, are the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Atonement, the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Pentecost. For those of you that grew up in a charismatic church, I thought Pentecost was something new that only happened to believers. It was years later that when I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's been a Feast of Pentecost way back in Moses' day. Yes, it was. And it was the same day of Pentecost when the apostles received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. That way it was on the beginning. That's why there were so many people in Jerusalem. And then the other 3, the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. Now those are the first 3 on the Jewish calendar year, on the far side, because they're in the spring. The Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and Feast of First Fruits. They were in the spring, and not quite the middle of the calendar year, but down towards May is Pentecost, and then closer to the fall was the Feast of Trumpets, Feast of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles. So there's only going to be 2 of these, and the Feast of Tabernacles is also known as the Feast of Booths. So let's take a look and see which 2 are left. You've got the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and the Passover. The others are all gone. Why? Why are these the only 2 that stick out? Each one of the 3 in the spring and in the fall were very significant. They were prophetic pictures of Jesus. Talking of Jesus coming, his resurrection, the forgiveness of sins that he would provide in the first 3, and the last 3 were more of his second coming, the trumpets, everything that was significant that we've gone through. And then Pentecost was kind of the age of the Gentile, the age of the church. So that Pentecost was that church time. So there won't be church at that point, because we'll just be in the presence of God the way he'll be all the time. So it's important that we have these 2. One is, next image, Reese, I think. That's the last one. Okay. So the Passover and the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. Passover is his redemption, and Booths represents his dwelling with people. That was when the glory of God would come. When they were told to start celebrating the Feast of Booths, God then had Moses create the temple that we looked at with the tent, where he would come and be with them. So Jesus will be here. People will still be around him. He'll be living with people. Again, there's still a little bit of sin. So it's important to remember the grace that was given through the Passover, which Jesus then fulfilled. And it was a foreshadow before he came in the flesh. So these are 2 days or times that we will have access to the temple. And also on Sabbaths, which would be, if we follow the same calendar, that 7th day for the Jewish people, it was Saturday. And then on new moon days. And let's look at Ezekiel chapter 46. We're going to look at 2 verses there, verses 3 and verses 9 in Ezekiel. It says, "The people of the land shall also worship at the doorway of that gate before the Lord on the Sabbaths and on the new moons." That's where we get that information from. "But when the people of the land come before the Lord at the appointed feasts, he who enters by way of the north gate to worship shall go out by the way of the south gate. And he who enters by way of the south gate shall go out by way of the north gate. No one shall return by way of the gate by which he entered, but shall go straight out." That's the last image I have for you, Reese?
Yeah.
Okay, go back to the first one of the temple again, when we see the little bit of an aerial view of it.
Yeah.
All right, so as we will be going to Jerusalem during this 1,000-year reign, this gate's closed. That's David's office. Can't go in there. Not because it's David's office, because Christ entered through there. So this is the north gate. So if we're going there, we all say, "Hey, remember me from Keystone Church? Let's go this Sabbath to see the temple, go see Jesus." We'll enter through the north gate. We'll come in. The things that we're supposed to do, we'll worship. Whatever happens there, I don't know. But as we exit, we can't go out that way. We have to come all the way across the courtyard and come out the south gate. Or if we say, "Hey, let's take a trip, through the Southlands," and we come in through the south, we then have to exit the next time we go through the north. Why do we have that trivial piece of information in there? Have you ever met a wallflower before? Remember those in college?
Yes.
The person that would show up at a party and like 3 days later, like, you were there? You never saw them. They just kind of got in and they sat in one corner and they kind of slip out. This way, if you come in this gate, as you leave, you have the opportunity to look in through the inner east gate and see the glory of God. Nobody will be able to enter the temple and exit without seeing him. Everybody that comes in will at least have to pass by, that as they're walking by, they can look and they will be able to see him. So God's saying, hey, you can't just sneak in and sneak out. You're going to be able to see me. I'm going to be able to know you were here. And we'll be able to go there because we're holy, so it's not a problem. We won't have anything to be shy or timid about. And it'll be, I'm assuming, the highlight of the trip of the day. But this gives everybody a chance to be able to look to the west as they enter and as they leave. And like I said, nothing unholy can be there. And in Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 8 and 9, so like the unbelievers that are here, like in this outer courtyard area, as you come in, there's like tables and things going on where some of the priests will be doing sacrifices and different things. There'll be different things that we don't know all the details about, but they'll be there for the people that aren't believers yet or haven't gotten their glorified body yet, but that are learning and coming to that place of, being able to be in the same position that we are. But it'll be, again, slightly different because it's a different timeline now. So in Ezekiel 44, 8 through 9, this is what changes. And you have not kept charge of my holy things yourselves, but you have set foreigners to keep charge of my sanctuary. Thus says the Lord God, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, of all foreigners who are among the sons of Israel, shall enter my sanctuary. Now, this is there because the priests, leading up to when the temple got destroyed in Jerusalem, had sinned, and they allowed Gentiles to come into the temple. They allowed them maybe not to go all the way into the Holy of Holies, but they allowed them on the temple grounds, which was forbidden. So because of that, Jesus is now saying, hey, when I'm there, if you're not a believer, you don't come that far. We're not going to defile it. It's going to be remained holy. It's going to remain clean. No unbelievers will never enter here. That's how we know that there's unbelievers, because it talks about the fact that somebody who's unclean or unworthy and uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh means somebody who hasn't accepted yet. They'll be required to come to the outer court for sacrifices, and that's where the priests come into play. Because we talked already before about there will be priests, there will be people who are doing things there. What is a priest? A priest is a mediator between God and people. In the Old Testament, you had Moses or Aaron, and you had the different priests that would mediate. And Jesus was always and is the ultimate high priest. But now, Paul calls us all, as believers, a royal priesthood. We're all priests. We're all mediators, kind of like what I talked about yesterday at church. We're all called to witness the glory of Jesus Christ. So that means we're telling people about Jesus and how they can be connected to God and with God's love. So that's what we all are. But there will be actual priests that will be doing certain things during this 1,000-year reign. They'll still be linking people to God, those that might not have accepted Jesus yet. And again, Jesus is the high priest, but there's only going to be specific priests again in the kingdom, similar to Moses' time. But if you remember, during Moses' time and all the way through, they were only people or men from the tribe of Levi. It was all Levites. They were the ones that were priests. They lose that opportunity. In Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 10 and verses 13 and 14. But the Levites who went far from me, when Israel went astray, who went astray from me after their idols, shall bear the punishment of their iniquity. And they shall not come near to me to serve as a priest to me, nor come near to any of my holy things, to the things that are most holy. But they will bear their shame and their abominations which they have committed. Yet I will appoint them to keep charge of the house, of all of its service, and all of that shall be done in it. So in other words, those Levites that allowed other idol worship and the defilement of the temple and helped lead people astray, they'll be able to serve in the temple area, but they're more like maintenance keepers, groundskeepers, like making sure that everything runs orderly. But when it comes to the sacrificial things or the things that need to be done, they won't be a part of it, except for one exception. There's a priest, anybody from the line of Zadok, and anybody from the line of Zadok will still be allowed to serve in that line. And when these priests were doing all these things, it was during Ezekiel's day. So Ezekiel writes about the ones that will be able to stay in and have these responsibilities in chapter 44 of Ezekiel, verses 15 and 16. And he says, "But the Levitical priest, the son of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary when the sons of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood, declares the Lord God. They shall enter my sanctuary. They shall come near to my table to minister to me and to keep my charge." Now, where do we know the name Zadok before? Anybody know? Okay. Back in the Old Testament, King David, the one who's going to be prince, who had some trouble being a good dad and leading things in the right way. You read his story. Well, at some point, his one son, Absalom, rises up, has a coup, and tries to overthrow David. So David is exiting the city with his wives and his children and the men that are with him, and they're leaving the city. And when they go to leave, the high priest at the time is Zadok. He takes the Ark of the Covenant, he leaves the temple, goes across the river with David and says, "Wherever you go, I'm going. The presence of God is with you. I am loyal to you." And at this point, David sees his loyalty, and he says, "Hey, Zadok, it's time for you to take the ark back where it belongs. Don't worry, God's going to be with me. God will bless you." And because of his faithfulness, his generations, a couple thousand years later, and into the new millennium, will have the opportunity to still serve as priests. Now, what do we get? What's the significance of that? Faithfulness here is going to allow us greater opportunity in the kingdom. When it talks about the rewards, the treasures that we store up in the kingdom, the things that we may sacrifice here to be an example, to be a witness, whatever the case may be, he showed his faithfulness. And that faithfulness can look in many different ways. You read through the Bible. So that's what I think is really cool there, that his faithfulness to God, to David, the man that God had appointed and anointed, is going to be rewarded in that millennial reign for his generations to come. So that's where we're at with the temple. We'll go into a little bit more detail next week as we finish out on what worship will actually look like in that time, as much as we can tell. And then so that'll be February 24th. So in 2 weeks, Monday, February 24th, we'll meet again to continue going through the rest of this phase. And trust me, in a couple weeks or so, we will get into chapters 20 and 21. We will get there. So that should do us for tonight. Let me pray. God, thank you for this evening, this chance to be in your word, to just see everything that you have laid out for us, that it's not a mystery. It's not going to be a shock. Yes, it'll still be amazing and beyond anything we could have imagined, to see this beautiful temple and to see your glory, Jesus, your Shekinah glory. And in person, it'll just be overwhelming. What a blessing it will be for us. Be with us now as we go throughout our day and our week. Give us opportunities to be a witness. Give us the opportunity to say, "Here I am. I'm available." Be with us now, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.